Well, one of the dominant themes throughout the history of this podcast, Ask Pastor John, is looking at the local church. How do I find a good local church? When should I leave my local church? Can I attend multiple churches? How do you respond to someone who says, I won't leave Jesus, but I'm done with the local church and its failed leaders, etc.? A lot of ground has been covered on these topics of the church and how it functions locally, as you can see in the APJ book, beginning on page 417. Yesterday, we read Galatians 6 together in our Bible reading, which relates to the local church and how it functions into a specific situation that we want to ask you about today, Pastor John. It's an anonymous email from a listener. Pastor John, hello. My son-in-law committed adultery and lied to the church elders about it. For it, they removed him from church membership. Since his transgression, he ended the adulterous relationship and repented and has been working hard to restore trust in his marriage. But the church has not reached out to him to restore his membership. He has continued to attend church and hasn't taken the Lord's Supper. The church does not allow him to attend the small group that they were a part of or go to membership potluck dinners. How and when does a church wisely restore the repentant? As a pastor, what fruit were you looking for? What were your steps forward? How did those who are spiritual, quote, restore him in a spirit of gentleness, as Paul says in Galatians 6:1?
Well, it's always dangerous, isn't it, to give local church advice from a distance. Oh my, there's so much of this on the internet, and it's so often quite harmful when people pontificate from a distance about what's happening in a local church thousands of miles away. From a distance, we seldom see all the factors that go into choices that elders and members are making. And so without telling this church what to do in any specific case, let me give maybe, 5 or 6 several biblical guidelines or principles that I think will provide some guidance in this situation. I have an opinion, but I'm so hesitant to put it forward as anything like absolute. So here's principle number 1. Church discipline is a good thing. The guidelines for practicing it are given in Matthew 18:15-17. Examples of it are given in 1 Corinthians 5 and 2 Thessalonians 3. The principle behind it is that the church is made up of baptized believers in Jesus, born again, spirit indwelt, Christ-obeying people. The expectation is that the church is, to use the words of Peter in 1 Peter 2:8, a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people of God's own possession, that we may proclaim the excellencies of him who called us out of darkness into marvelous light. And to the degree that a local church ceases to be a distinct and holy people, to that degree do we cease to be a true church bearing witness to our calling out of darkness into the light of holiness. Discipline is the way that the church exhorts itself to walk in holiness and puts out of the church those whose unholiness brings reproach upon Christ. So principle number 1, discipline is good. Number 2, the aim of all discipline in the church is not destruction or damnation or alienation, but rather restoration and salvation. We see that repeatedly in Matthew 18, where the aim is to gain the brother who has sinned. We see it in Galatians 6, where the aim is to restore the one overtaken in sin. We see it in 1 Corinthians 5, where the hope is that even in the last day, after death, the discipline will have brought someone to repentance and salvation. So that's number 2. The aim is restoration and salvation. Number 3, the restoration to church membership does not imply that sins have no ongoing repercussions. There are several levels of restoration. We know this because the standards for becoming an elder, for example, in 1 Timothy 3 and Titus 1, are higher. Those standards are higher than for an ordinary church member. Now, that would imply, it seems to me, in principle, that there are various roles of leadership in the church for which a person may not qualify, even though he is restored to membership in the church. I think the New Testament shows that the door to membership is very wide, and the door to eldership, for example, is very narrow. And I think the implication of this is that we should not exclude from membership a person who gives genuine evidence of repentance, even if we think that person's trustworthiness is tarnished enough that he would not yet qualify for certain roles until he has recovered the trust that he once had and squandered through some sin. Number 4, there are degrees of betrayal, degrees of shortcoming, degrees of waywardness. It's not helpful to say that all sins are equally flagrant, equally harmful. They're not. For example, in 1 Corinthians 6, Paul believes that the ideal reaction for a person who's been wronged is not to take the brother to court. He says, why not rather just be wronged? Verse 7. But when they fail in that ideal, his next best thing is to say, well, at least in the Christian community, there certainly is a judge who could help you sort this out instead of going to pagan judges. In other words, Paul does not jump immediately to church discipline at the first level of shortcoming. He sees degrees of shortcoming. We take this into account when we restore a believer. And number 5, there are genuine and counterfeit tears of repentance, which implies that leaders must be discerning when they assess a person's readiness for restoration. I was always amazed when I bump into this every time I read through the Bible in 2 Corinthians 7, 10, and 11, where Paul says, godly grief produces repentance that leads to salvation without regret, whereas worldly grief, now think about that, worldly grief, worldly tears, produces death. For see what earnestness this godly grief has produced in you. So most of us who have dealt with repenting people over the decades have discovered that there are tears that are only because of the consequences of sin, not the evil of sin. Tears for the misery the sinner feels, not tears because they've done dishonor to God's glory. So leaders have to be very discerning as to what repentance really is, whether penitence and tears are really signs that a heart is broken for the Godwardness of the sin, not just the mess up life it brought them into. And then finally, number 6. This implies that spiritually discerning leaders may see in a person such a divisive spirit that they encourage the church to have nothing more to do with him as a believer. Titus 3:10. As for a person who stirs up division, after warning him once, then twice, have nothing more to do with him. So those are my 6 principles. So my conclusion is that while I don't know enough of the details of the situation we're being asked about, nevertheless, I would say that as far as membership goes, the door should be wide for restoration unless there's some very good reason to think that a person's repentance is not sincere.
That's very pastorally sensitive and wise here, Pastor John. Thank you for that counsel. And if you want more on the local church and how it should function, or how to find a good local church, when to know it's time to leave a church, or if you hear someone say, I'm not going to leave Jesus, but I'm done with the local church and its failed leaders, etc. A lot of ground, like questions like that, topics like that have been covered over the years in the APJ podcast. And you'll see that in the APJ book on pages 417 to 420, a little index to help you find your way around our extensive audio archive when you need it. Well, Paul prayed that Christians would have the eyes of your hearts enlightened, that you may know what is the hope to which he has called you, what are the riches of his glorious inheritance in the saints. Wow, a text like that, an awakening like this is necessary if we're ever going to escape the clutches of our culture, our entertainment culture, and to find personal awakening and global revival. But to embrace a text like that, Ephesians 1:18, and to feel its influence in our lives requires that we first understand it. Ephesians 1:18, what does it mean? That's up next time. I'm Tony Reiki. See you on Thursday.